Welcome to Ece Gurler Art. I got so many questions from you about how you can draw more realistically, because you are complaining that you're drawing and you're doing your best, but it just doesn't look the same and you want it to be the same. What techniques can we use in order to do that? I will give you 5 tips today. If you like my tips or if you like my tutorials in general, please don't forget to subscribe or hit the like button so that I can feel your support. Okay, first thing first, we need to improve our vision, which is not the subject of this video. If you want to learn more about it, please go watch this one first and then come back here later. Because if you cannot improve your artistic vision, all the things I'm going to say in this video is not gonna work. Okay, the first tip is your initial draft. Every artist needs an initial draft. Some of them do it from real life, some of them use grid method, some of them use dot method, and some of them just basically use copy method. And there are many other ways to create your initial draft, which I talked about in my other videos. But whatever method you choose, you need to choose the one that gives you the most correct proportions. And according to my experience, grid method, especially for novice artists, is the best option because you cannot go wrong with the grid method, guys. The second question about initial draft is what to include and what not. You are not supposed to include all the details, but all the outlines need to be there. And especially with eyes, you need to be careful because in our eyes, there are so many lines. There's like a water line and there's another line right underneath our eyebrow, and then there's like eyelashes come out from different line. There are at least 7 or 8 borders lines there in our eyes. So definitely you need to include those. Where the light is changing, where the shadow is starting, or where the colors are changing, you can definitely outline that in your initial draft as well. Where the hair starts, where the chin meets the neck, where the nostrils are, and where probably the shadows on the nose and the highlight on the nose. Those are important things to include in your initial draft. What we don't include are the details like eyelashes, eyebrows, teeth. I don't include teeth. An outline of the hair, where it starts and where it ends, should be sufficient. Number 2 is adding the shadows and the highlights right. This is probably one of the fundamental mistakes that a lot of new artists make, and it is preventable, guys. What light and shadow does, it creates a 3D effect, and so that you can see the depth of the portrait. You can see which one is closer to the light source, which one is away from the light source, so that your portrait will look more realistic. For example, the tip of your nose, the middle of your forehead, and the middle of your chin is going to be much lighter than the rest of your face because they are closer to the light source. Whereas right underneath of your lower lip, where your chin meets your neck, because your chin casts a shadow on your neck, as you can see here, and probably around these places on your cheek will be darker than the rest of your face because they are the farthest from the light source. And in between we have midtones, which means again you're going to decide what are the transitional gray tones there. Many novice artists that I work with, they hesitate to go dark, but the darkest shadows are the most important on the face because that's how you are going to get your contrast. Especially some of my students freak out when they're dealing with charcoal because it's so dark and so difficult to erase, but once they learn how to use it, they cannot leave it, guys, because they know how incredible it is to give depth with charcoal. So my suggestion is study the light and shadow on that portrait before you start your portrait. Okay, where are the midtones? Where is the darkest part and where's the lightest section? Which pencil you are going to use for what shadow? Let's say this one has the darkest shadow here and you see some dark shadow here. Are they the same shade of gray or they are different? Where are the highlights of the face and what's the brightest point on that face? And according to that play of the shadow and light, try to guess where the light source is. This will help you a lot. Number 3, Try to avoid contouring. What is contouring? So when you look at my face, do you see lines when you look at my nose? No, I'm not an object. It's not made of lines. But I see so many new artists start drawing lines to draw a nose, or drawing lines to draw the chin. So look at my chin area right now. What separates my chin from my neck is a shadow, right? So this shadow makes it look like there's a line here, but there's no line. What you see here is a contrast between a lighter shade of gray, well, black and white drawing, and darker shade of gray. That's it. When you create the shade difference, then the line will appear by itself. Stop outlining arms, lips, and chin, and the nose. Please don't. The only places you can use lines are your eyes. Once you get that habit of creating lines by just creating shade differences, you are going to be amazed by how realistic your portrait will start to look. Number 4, don't be lazy and make more layers. I see a lot of artists give up after 2 layers of shading. Well, sometimes in order to get that shade difference, in order to get that perfect mid-tone, we need to add more layers, maybe 4, maybe 5, maybe 7 times, you know? Especially if you are using the technique of toning, then you need to blend and you need to add more shadows, and when you blend, shadows lose their darkness, so you need to add more shadows as the second and third layer. Or the highlights, let's say you added some highlights with your eraser, but it's not going to look natural if you don't blend it, and once you blend it, it's going to lose its brightness, and that's the whole key of toning process. So in order to make the most realistic portrait, you need to work in layers and you need to be patient within each layer, and don't give up after just 2 layers. Oh no, it looks good. Well, you don't know, maybe it's gonna look better, so try. Once you realize for the last 2 layers whatever difference you make is not changing anything much, then you might stop. And number 5 is something that a lot of artists forget about, and I think it's so important. Let me explain what the last touch means for me. When I do black and white portraits, I usually follow a pattern. Unless I'm doing dry brush technique with charcoal, I usually start from the eye, I move on to the nose and then the lips and stuff like that. I have an order, okay? A lot of artists might have their own order. But what happens when you work in order, when you work on one area for a very long time, your eyes get tuned to it. And after a while, you're like, okay, I'm done with this, I'm gonna come back to it later. So you start the second eye. Same thing happens. You're like, I'm done with this, let me move on to the nose, because you're so excited to move on to and see what your portrait is gonna look like. So at the end, you have a finished portrait or finished looking portrait, but it's not finished, it's 85% finished, because you kept moving with the excitement of the next step, and you always said like, oh, I'm gonna perfect it later. And then when you look at the whole picture, now you have an advantage because you can see the whole picture, whole reference photo, and you can tell what the differences are, what the mistakes are, and you can go back in and fix them or better them. It is hard to do this while you are in the process of creating the first layers. It is best to go back to it once it's finished 85% and make those adjustments to make it 100%. I usually use my white gel pen for the highlights and on the eyes and on the lips, or I add a few more flying hair sometimes with my eraser, my stick eraser. If I don't find the dark spots dark enough, I go back in with my charcoal or the darkest grade of my graphite pencil and I make it darker. I add more kneaded eraser strokes maybe to make it lighter on the cheekbones. I don't know. That's what I try to make at the end, at the very end, at the last touches. But these are the key to make it look much more realistic. I hope these tips were helpful for you guys. Okay, you got some tips in this video, but maybe you need to know some others too about the mistakes that other artists make in black and white drawing. If you want to check them out, I'm putting them right here. I'll see you in my next video, guys. Bye!